They say the walls have ears, but in my penthouse, the walls have memories. They remember every sacrifice I made while my husband and his mother played at being royalty. Tonight, those same walls whispered a secret that turned my blood to ice. I wasn't just being pushed out of my own home, I was being erased from existence. They thought they were burying a tired old woman. They forgot that I'm the one who dug the holes for everyone who stood in my way before them. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives by sunrise, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You're watching Vintage Vengeance, where the payback is timeless and the mercy is non-existent. 60 years is a long time to build a fortress, and exactly 1 minute is all it takes to watch it crumble. My name is Beatrice, and for 3 decades, I have been the silent backbone of the sterling name. I turned a failing family estate into a skyline empire that people literally die to live in. I gave my husband, Theo, the life he was too weak to earn for himself. I gave my daughter-in-law, Amanda, a seat at tables she couldn't even afford to wait on. It was our 30th anniversary. The champagne was flowing, and the smell of expensive lilies filled the air of our triplex penthouse. I had stepped away from the gala downstairs to change my shoes, my feet aching from playing the gracious hostess. As I approached the heavy mahogany doors of the library, I heard a sound that stopped me dead. It was a laugh. Not a celebratory laugh, but a jagged, mocking sound. It belonged to my mother-in-law, Ma Dear, a woman who has hated me since the day I refused to let her control my kitchen. It's almost poetic, isn't it? Ma Dear's voice was like sandpaper on silk. 30 years of her hoarding the keys to this city. Tonight, we finally changed the locks. Is the doctor ready? That was Amanda, my son's wife. The girl I treated like the daughter I never had. There was a coldness in her voice that made my skin crawl. If we wait any longer, she'll notice the fog in her head. We need the commitment papers signed tonight while she's still confused from the toast. The facility is upstate, Theo chimed in. My husband, my partner, the man who slept beside me for half a lifetime. It's private. No phones, no visitors. Once she's tucked away for early onset dementia, the board will hand the voting rights to me. She'll be a ghost in a gown within 48 hours. I stood in the hallway, my hand frozen on the handle. They weren't just stealing my company, they were stealing my breathing room. They were planning to lock me in a padded cell while they feasted on my legacy. They didn't want a divorce. They didn't want a payout. They wanted me gone permanently so they could play with the empire I built without me looking over their shoulders. Do you think she suspects the medication? Amanda asked, a clink of glass following her question. Beatrice thinks she's untouchable. Ma Dear spat. She thinks she's the queen. She doesn't realize we've been undermining her foundation for months. By tomorrow morning, this penthouse will belong to people who actually deserve it. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Tears are for the weak, and I am the woman who paved the streets of this city with the bones of my competitors. Instead, I backed away into the shadows of the gallery. My mind, far from being foggy, became a razor-sharp blade. They wanted a ghost. Fine. I would give them a haunting they would never survive. The penthouse empire wasn't just about the deeds in the safe or the stock in the vault. It was about the leverage. I knew where everybody was buried. Literally, I knew which councilmen were on the take, which inspectors were bought, and which accidents had occurred during the construction of our flagship tower. They thought they were moving me out. They didn't realize that I was the only thing holding the roof up. If I left, I was taking the oxygen with me. I checked my watch. 10:45 p.m. The toast was scheduled for midnight. I had 75 minutes to dismantle 30 years of their comfort. I didn't need a lawyer. I didn't need a judge. I needed the digital keys to the security grid and the leverage I had stored in the floorboards of the master suite. I walked back toward the gala with a smile that would have terrified them if they were smart enough to look closely. Theo caught my eye from across the room, raising a glass of the very wine they had spiked. He looked at me with pity. "Pity, are you feeling all right, Beatrice?" he asked, gliding over and placing a heavy, treacherous hand on my shoulder. "You look a bit tired. Maybe we should cut the night short." "I've never felt more awake, Theo," I whispered, leaning in as if to share a romantic secret. "In fact, I think tonight is going to be a night none of us will ever forget." He smiled, thinking he had won. He had no idea that while they were planning to move me to a facility, I was already moving the pieces to turn this penthouse into their tomb. By dawn, they wouldn't just be poor. They would be hunted. The gala downstairs was a sea of false smiles and expensive silk, but to me, it looked like a funeral procession where the corpse was still walking. Theo squeezed my arm, his touch feeling like a serpent coiling around my skin. He thought he was comforting a confused old woman. He didn't realize he was touching a live wire. "Go sit on the dais, Beatrice," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and betrayal. "Ma dear and Amanda are waiting. We'll do the toast, and then I'll take you upstairs to rest. You've done enough." "Oh, I've done more than you know, Theo," I replied, my voice as smooth as polished marble. I walked toward the dais, but I didn't sit. I detoured through the catering kitchen, weaving past the busy staff. They didn't question the mistress of the house. I slipped into the service elevator and punched the code for the sub-basement, a level that didn't exist on the public blueprints of the Sterling building. This wasn't about bank accounts. This was about the server. 30 years ago, when we broke ground on this penthouse empire, I insisted on a proprietary security and data infrastructure. Theo thought it was a vanity project. In reality, it was my insurance policy. Every smart lock, every hidden camera, and every encrypted communication in this building ran through my private hub. I stepped into the cold, climate-controlled room. The blue lights of the servers flickered like watchful eyes. I sat at the terminal and cracked my knuckles. They wanted to commit me. They wanted to claim I was losing my mind. Fine. I would show them what a mind like mine could do when it was pushed to the edge. "Hello, Beatrice," the system voice purred. I had programmed it myself. "Initiate protocol midnight." I commanded in an instant. I wasn't just a wife or a mother-in-law. I was the ghost in the machine. I began pulling the digital threads. Amanda, my lovely daughter-in-law, had been using the penthouse's secure line to coordinate a side business, moving stolen luxury goods through our freight elevators. She thought she was being clever, hiding her paper trail in the company's shipping manifests. She didn't know I had every recording, every timestamp, and every face scan of her associates. Then there was Ma Dear. The matriarch of the Sterling family had a secret habit that cost more than her jewelry collection. She had been funneling donations from our family's nonprofit into an offshore account to cover her gambling debts in Macau. I didn't just have the logs. I had the video of her signing the forged documents in this very library. And Theo, my dear, weak Theo, his betrayal was the most pathetic. He wasn't just trying to commit me. He was covering up a construction scandal from 5 years ago. He had authorized the use of substandard steel in the North Tower to pocket a $10 million kickback. People were living in a building that was one structural tremor away from a catastrophe. He thought he'd buried the evidence. He didn't know I kept the original metallurgical reports in a physical safe box hidden behind the wine cellar. I didn't move money. I moved evidence. With a few keystrokes, I redirected the internal server backups. I didn't delete them. I sent them to a timed release. At 6 a.m., every piece of Amanda's smuggling data would be sent to the port authorities. Ma Dear's embezzlement records would hit the inbox of the Internal Revenue investigators. And Theo's structural reports, those were going to the building inspectors and the families living in the North Tower. But that was too clean. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in before the authorities even arrived. System. I whispered, my eyes reflecting the cold blue light. Activate the lockdown overrides for the primary suite. Change all biometric access to my voice print only. And disable the elevators for anyone without executive clearance. I checked the time. 11:15 p.m. I headed back up to the penthouse. I didn't go back to the party. I went to our private quarters. I walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city I helped build. I looked at the twinkling lights and felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. I opened the hidden wall panel in the dressing room. Inside wasn't gold or cash. It was a collection of keys, physical and digital. To every dirty secret the Sterling family had accumulated over 3 decades. I took the master tablet and the physical ledger. Suddenly, the door to the suite swung open. It was Amanda. She looked flushed, her eyes darting around the room. She was holding a small vial, the medication they intended to slip into my glass. Beatrice, why aren't you downstairs? She asked, trying to sound concerned, but her voice was trembling. Theo is about to start the speeches. I turned slowly, the heavy ledger in my hand. I looked at her, really looked at her, until her fake smile began to wither. The speeches can wait, Amanda, I said. I was just finishing some last-minute filing. You know how I am about keeping things organized. She stepped into the room, her eyes landing on the open wall panel. Her face went pale. What is that? I thought that was just a utility closet. It's a graveyard, honey, I said, walking toward her. And I think it's time you saw where your name is buried. Amanda froze. The small glass vial in her hand caught the light from the chandelier, shimmering with a wicked, iridescent sheen. She tried to hide it behind the folds of her designer gown, but she was too slow. My eyes were already locked onto her trembling fingers. What graveyard, Beatrice? She asked, her voice cracking like thin ice. You're talking crazy. This is exactly what Theo was worried about. You've been under so much stress lately. You aren't seeing things clearly. I see with perfect clarity, Amanda, I said, stepping closer. I didn't stop until I was inches from her face. At 60, I still stood taller than her, my posture forged in decades of boardrooms and battles. I see a girl who came from nothing, whom I dressed in silk and taught which fork to use, now holding a sedative meant for her benefactor. Tell me, does Ma dear know you're this clumsy, or is she downstairs waiting for the signal? Amanda's eyes went wide. The confused old woman act she expected was gone. In its place was the woman who had crushed the construction unions in the 90s. I reached out and plucked the vial from her hand. She was too stunned to resist. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, backing toward the door. That's just my heart medication. Then you should be more careful with it, I whispered, uncapping the vial and pouring the clear liquid into a decorative vase of lilies on the side table. Within seconds, the flowers began to droop, their petals turning a sickly gray. It seems your medicine is quite potent. I turned my back on her and walked toward the master safe. I didn't need a code. I used my thumbprint. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing not stacks of cash, but rows of high-density external drives and physical ledgers bound in black leather. You think this penthouse empire is about the square footage, don't you? I asked, pulling out a ledger labeled Distribution and Logistics 2023. You thought you were so clever, Amanda, using my freight elevators at 3 a.m. to move those crates of unmarked luxury watches and stolen tech. You thought the security guards were looking the other way because they liked you. They were looking the other way because I told them to. Amanda's face drained of all color. You knew. I've known for 18 months. I said, flipping through the pages. I have the manifests. I have the names of your buyers in Jersey. I even have the recordings of you bragging to your sister about how easy it was to rob the Sterlings blind. I didn't stop you because I wanted to see how deep you dig your own hole. And darling, you've reached the bedrock. I slammed the ledger shut. The sound echoed through the suite like a gunshot. Theo won't care. Amanda hissed, her desperation finally turning into venom. He wants you gone just as much as I do. He's the one who signed the papers for the facility. Once you're committed, your evidence won't mean a thing. A judge won't listen to a woman diagnosed with dementia. That's the beauty of it, Amanda. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. I'm not taking this to a judge. I'm not taking this to a lawyer. I'm taking this to the one person who hates a thief more than I do. Your business partner, Mr. Holloway. You remember him? The man you shortchanged by $50,000 last month? He's currently downstairs at the gala, looking for his missing investment. Amanda gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Holloway was a man known for his brutality, not his legal filings. I sent him a little text from your private burner phone 5 minutes ago. I continued, checking my watch. I told him you had the money in the Penthouse safe and that you were planning to skip town tonight after the toast. He should be coming up the service elevator any second now. You're lying, she screamed, lunging for the door. I didn't move. I simply hit a button on my master tablet. The heavy mahogany doors of the suite clicked shut, the electronic bolts sliding into place with a finality that made her jump. The room is on lockdown, Amanda. No one goes out, and no one comes in, except for those I've authorized, I said calmly. And I just authorized the service elevator for one very angry man. At that moment, the muffled sound of the service elevator bell chimed from the hallway. Amanda began to claw at the door, her manicured nails snapping against the wood. Let me out. Beatrice, please. I'll tell Theo we made a mistake. I'll tell Ma dear to stop. It's far too late for apologies, I said, walking toward the hidden passage that led to the library. You wanted to play in the big leagues, Amanda. You forgot that the owner of the stadium always knows where the traps are set. Enjoy your meeting with Mr. Holloway. I have a toast to attend. I stepped into the dark passage and closed the panel behind me, leaving her screaming in the silence of the suite. I had 2 more serpents to deal with, and the clock was ticking toward midnight. The passage was narrow and smelled of old paper and cold stone. It was a relic of the original building's design that I had insisted on keeping when we renovated the triplex. It allowed me to move between the master suite and the library without passing through the main gallery. As I walked, I could hear the muffled thumping of Amanda's fists against the mahogany doors behind me. It was a rhythmic, desperate sound, the heartbeat of a trapped animal. I stepped out behind a faux bookshelf in the library. The room was dim, lit only by the glowing embers in the fireplace and the moonlight spilling across the Persian rug. Ma dear was sitting in my wingback chair, sipping a glass of dark sherry. She looked like a queen on a stolen throne, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her spine as rigid as the laws she broke. You're late for your own execution, Beatrice, she said without turning around. Her voice was a low, melodic rasp that had commanded the Sterling household for 40 years. The guests are wondering why the woman of the hour has vanished. I was just seeing to Amanda, I said, stepping into the light. She seemed distressed. I believe she's having a very private meeting in the master suite right now. Ma dear turned her head, her sharp eyes narrowing. A meeting? With whom? She was supposed to be preparing the final toast. With a debt collector, I said, leaning against the heavy oak desk. One of her own making. It seems our dear Amanda hasn't been entirely honest about her side ventures. But then again, honesty isn't exactly a sterling family trait, is it, ma dear? The older woman set her glass down with a deliberate click. Don't get smart with me. Girl, I knew you when you were nothing but a girl with a clipboard and a dream of social climbing. I made you a sterling. I gave you the name that opened every door in this city. And I built the buildings those doors are attached to. I countered. You gave me a name that was drowning in debt and scandal. I gave you a crown. But tonight, you tried to take my mind. That was your final mistake. Ma dear chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Your mind is already gone, Beatrice. The doctors we've hired are the best money can buy. Their reports are already written. They describe a woman suffering from paranoid delusions, erratic behavior, and falsified memories of financial crimes. Who do you think the board will believe? A hysterical woman or the grieving husband and mother-in-law who only want what's best for her? I looked at the framed portrait of the family on the mantel. We looked so perfect, so stable. The board will believe the numbers, ma dear. They always do. They didn't care about your gambling habits when the profits were high, but they'll care very much about the $300 million you've bled from the Sterling Hope Foundation over the last decade. Ma dear's hand shook just for a fraction of a second. Those accounts are sealed, encrypted by the best firms in the country. They were, I said, walking around the desk, until I installed the new security patch last month. I didn't just open those accounts. I linked them to a very specific set of recipients. You see, ma dear, I know about the second family in Chicago. I know about the brother you've been supporting, the one the world thinks died in prison 20 years ago. I know you've been using foundation money to keep his crimes quiet and his stomach full. Ma dear stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. You wouldn't dare. That would destroy the sterling reputation. You'd be burning your own house down. I'm not burning the house, ma dear. I'm just changing the locks. I whispered. I've already transferred the foundation's remaining assets into a private trust for the North Tower residents, the ones Theo endangered with his cheap steel. As for your Chicago secret, I sent the location of your brother's safe house to the families of his victims. They've been looking for him for a long time. I imagine they'll be arriving at his door just about the time the police arrive at yours. Ma dear lunged for the phone on the desk, her movements surprisingly fast for a woman of 80. I didn't stop her. I watched as she frantically pressed the buttons. It's dead, ma dear, I said. The entire penthouse is on a localized signal jammer. No calls out, no texts, no internet. Just you, me, and the ghosts of every person you've stepped on to stay on top. You monster, she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage she could no longer contain. I'm a sterling, I said, throwing her own words back at her. You taught me everything I know. You taught me that family is just a collection of people you use until they become a liability. Well, tonight, you, Theo, and Amanda have officially become liabilities. And in this empire, we liquidate liabilities. I checked my watch. 11:30 p.m. Now, I said, gesturing toward the hidden passage, I suggest you go check on Amanda. If Mr. Holloway hasn't finished his business, you might still have time to say goodbye. I have one more stop to make. My husband is waiting for his toast. I left her standing in the middle of the library, the shadow of the wingback chair, looking like a vulture, waiting for the end. I had dismantled the daughter-in-law and the matriarch. Now, it was time to face the man who had promised to love me until death, and then tried to speed up the process. The descent from the library to the grand ballroom felt like walking through the belly of a beast I had raised from a cub. Every gold-leafed molding, every marble tile, and every silent security guard was there because I had signed the check. As I stepped onto the balcony overlooking the gala, the roar of conversation and the clinking of crystal hit me like a physical wave. At the center of it all stood Theo, looking every bit the dashing patriarch in his tailored tuxedo. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a flute of vintage Krug in his hand. He looked happy. Why wouldn't he be? In his mind, I was already a ghost haunting a sanitarium, and he was the sole heir to a kingdom built on my brilliance. He hadn't noticed that Amanda hadn't returned. He hadn't noticed that Ma Dear was missing from her perch. He was too drunk on his own perceived victory. I smoothed my silk gown and began my walk down the grand staircase. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, necks craned, and whispers followed in my wake. I wasn't just Beatrice Sterling. I was the North Star of this social galaxy, and tonight I was burning brighter than ever. Beatrice, Theo called out, his smile faltering just a fraction as I approached. He scanned the area behind me, looking for the confusion he expected to see on my face. There you are. We were just about to send a search party. Are you feeling steady? Steadier than the North Tower. Theo, I said, my voice carrying just enough to make the city councilman standing next to him blink. Theo's eyes twitched. It was a tell he'd had since we were 22, a small spark of panic he couldn't quite douse. He stepped forward, trying to lower his voice while maintaining his doting husband persona for the guests. What is that supposed to mean? He hissed through a tight smile. Beatrice, don't do this here. You're tired. Let's just do the toast and get you upstairs. The toast, I repeated, taking a glass from a passing waiter. I didn't drink. I just held it, the amber liquid catching the light. Yes, let's talk about the toast. And the medication Amanda tried to serve me. Or perhaps we should talk about the structural reports from 5 years ago. The ones that say the foundation of our flagship building is riddled with air pockets because someone wanted a $10 million kickback. Theo's face went from tan to a sickly, chalky gray. He grabbed my elbow, his grip bruising. Shut up. You're making a scene. People are looking. Let them look, Theo. They've spent 30 years looking at a lie. It's time they saw the truth, I said, pulling my arm away with a sharp tug. I walked toward the microphone at the front of the room. The band stopped playing. The room went silent, the kind of silence that precedes a car crash. I looked out at the faces of the city's elite, the vultures, the climbers, and the hangers-on. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice amplified and echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Tonight marks 30 years of the Sterling Empire. My husband, Theo, thinks tonight is about a transition of power. He thinks that because I am a woman of 60, I am somehow fading. He and his mother have spent months planning to put me away so they could continue their creative accounting in peace. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Theo started toward the stage, his face contorted in a mask of desperation. Beatrice, stop. She's not well. Everyone. The dementia is worse than we feared. I've never been sharper, Theo, I said, looking directly into the lens of the professional videographer recording the event for our social media. And because I'm so sharp, I've spent the last hour ensuring that the Sterling name is exactly what you turned it into, a liability. I've already sent the metallurgical reports to the building commission. I've sent the wire transfer logs for Ma Dear's Chicago secrets to the authorities. And as for Amanda, well, I believe the police are upstairs right now dealing with her and a very disgruntled business partner. Theo reached the edge of the stage, his hands shaking. You've destroyed us. You've destroyed everything we built. No, Theo, I said, leaning into the microphone for the final blow. I built this. You just lived in it. And now I'm moving out. But before I go, I have one last gift for you. I hit a command on my hidden tablet in my palm. Suddenly, every television screen in the ballroom, usually displaying highlights of our charitable works, flickered. Instead of gala footage, they showed the grainy, high-definition security feed from the library an hour ago. The entire room watched in horrific silence as Theo, Ma dear, and Amanda plotted to drug me and ship me off to a private facility. Their voices, clear and cold, filled the ballroom. She'll be a ghost in a gown within 48 hours. Theo's recorded voice boomed. The socialites stared in disgust. The business partners began to back away as if Theo was radioactive. The empire isn't the money, Theo, I said, stepping off the stage as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. The empire is the reputation, and yours just hit the pavement from 60 stories up. The sirens grew louder, a piercing harmony of blue and red lights reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse. The ballroom, once a sanctuary of the elite, had transformed into a cage. The guests were scrambling for the exits, their expensive heels clicking frantically against the marble, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive wreckage of the sterling name. Theo stood frozen at the foot of the stage, his eyes glued to the monitors where his own voice continued to loop, detailing his plan to erase me. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The tailored suit that usually projected power now looked like it was wearing him. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was a cornered thief. "Beatrice, wait," he shouted, stumbling toward me as I walked toward the private elevator. "We can fix this. I'll tell them I was pressured. I'll blame Ma dear. You know how she is. She manipulated me." I stopped and turned, my expression as cold as a winter morning in the city. "That's your great defense, Theo? Cowardice? You'd throw your own mother under the bus to save a reputation that's already in the gutter." "I love you," he pleaded, reaching for my hand. I recoiled as if his touch were toxic. "You love the lifestyle I provided. You love the shadow I let you stand in so you wouldn't get burned by the sun. But you never loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have scouted out padded rooms for the woman who gave you everything." Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the police, not yet. It was a group of men in dark, nondescript suits. These weren't the friends we invited to dinner. These were the investors from the North Tower project, the ones who had put their billions into a building that was now legally and structurally a tomb. At their head was Julian Vane, a man whose family had controlled the city's docks for 3 generations. He wasn't a man who used lawyers. He used results. Julian walked straight to Theo, ignoring the chaos. He held a tablet displaying the metallurgical reports I had leaked just minutes prior. "Theo," Julian said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "I just got a very interesting email. It seems the steel in my residential tower is about as sturdy as a soda straw. My daughter lives on the 42nd floor of that building." Theo began to shake. "Julian, I can explain. It was a supply chain issue. Save it," Julian interrupted, his eyes shifting to me for a brief, respectful nod. "Beatrice, I assume the authorities are on their way for the financial side of things." "The police are 3 minutes out, Julian," I said calmly, "and the building inspectors are right behind them. Every floor of the Sterling Empire is being condemned as we speak." "Good," Julian said, turning back to Theo, "because the police will only take you to jail. But before they get here, you and I are going to have a very private conversation about my daughter's safety." 2 of Julian's men stepped forward, flanking Theo. The empire was gone. The protection was gone. My husband, the man who thought he could play God with people's lives, and my freedom was finally facing a predator he couldn't bribe. I didn't stay to watch the conversation. I had no interest in the brutality of men like Julian, even if Theo deserved every bit of it. I had my own exit to manage. I stepped into the private elevator and swiped my master key. Penthouse level, I commanded. As the gold-plated doors slid shut, I saw Theo being led toward the service corridor, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He had spent years thinking he was the one holding the leash. He never realized I was the one who built the cage. When the elevator opened into the quiet luxury of the triplex, the contrast was jarring. Downstairs was a riot. Up here, it was a tomb. I walked past the shattered mahogany doors of the master suite. Amanda was gone. Mr. Holloway was gone. All that remained were the deep gouges in the wood where Amanda had tried to claw her way out, and a single, discarded silk heel. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. My heart rate was normal. For the first time in 30 years, the air in this penthouse didn't feel heavy with the weight of Theo's incompetence or Madir's judgment. I looked at the clock. 11:50 p.m. 10 minutes until the world officially ended for the Sterlings. 10 minutes until the morning papers would have to rewrite their front pages. I sat at the island, watching the city lights through the window, waiting for the final act of the night. I wasn't just moving millions. I was moving a legacy. And by the time the sun rose, I would be the only one left standing among the ruins. The silence of the penthouse was broken by a low, rhythmic thudding from above. My private helipad. They didn't know I had already grounded the pilot and disabled the flight codes. They were like rats scurrying toward a lifeboat that had already been scuttled. I set my glass of water down and walked toward the grand staircase, my heels echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. I found Madir in the upper gallery, her face twisted into a snarl of desperation. She was clutching a vintage leather vanity case, the one she kept her emergency jewelry in. She saw me and stopped, her chest heaving. "The elevators are locked," she hissed, her voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over a grave. "What did you do, Beatrice? What did you do to the system?" "I reclaimed it," I said, leaning against the railing. "This building is a living organism, Madir, and right now, its immune system is rejecting the parasites. You're not going to the roof. You're not going to Chicago. You're staying right here to greet the guests who are climbing the stairs. You think you've won?" She stepped toward me, her eyes wild. "I have enough dirt on the people in this city to bury you along with us. If I go down, I'm taking every brick of this empire with me. I'll tell them you planned it all. I'll tell them you were the architect of the North Tower kickbacks." "Go ahead," I shrugged. "But while you were sipping sherry in the library, I was uploading 30 years of your personal correspondence to a secure cloud. I have the recordings of you berating Theo for not being aggressive enough with the steel contractors. I have the receipts of you paying off the site inspectors. You didn't just participate, Madir. You were the one who taught Theo how to cheat. You just forgot that I was the one keeping the books." The old woman's face crumpled. The mask of the sterling matriarch finally fell, revealing the hollow, bitter shell underneath. She looked at the vanity case in her hand, the gold and diamonds she had traded her soul for, and realized they were worthless. They were just heavy stones now. "Why," she whispered, "we were a family. We were a transaction." I corrected. "And your credit just ran out." A sudden crash echoed from the foyer below. The police had finally breached the main doors. I could hear the heavy boots of the tactical teams hitting the marble. They weren't coming for a polite conversation. They were coming for the criminals I had served up on a silver platter. I turned away from her and walked toward my private study. I had one final task before the curtain fell. I didn't need to pack. Everything I truly owned, my mind, my pride, and my freedom was already with me. I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a single burner phone. I dialed a number I had memorized a decade ago. "It's done," I said when the line picked up. "The Sterling name is a carcass. The North Tower is condemned. The investors are looking for blood, and the police are in the lobby. Release the rest of the files to the press in 10 minutes. I want the morning news to be a postmortem. And what about you, Beatrice? The voice on the other end asked. You're still in the building. I'm the one who called the architect, I said, looking out at the city skyline. I know exactly where the exits are. Just make sure the world knows that the Sterling Empire didn't fall because of a mistake. It fell because I decided it was time to tear it down. I hung up and smashed the phone under the heel of my shoe. I felt a strange sense of peace. For 30 years, I had been the keeper of everyone else's secrets. I had been the glue holding together a family of vipers. Tonight, I had finally let the glue dry and crack. I heard the shouting getting closer. The police were on the move, clearing the floors. Mahdir was screaming in the hallway now, a shrill panic sound that was quickly muffled by a firm, authoritative voice. Mahdir Sterling? You're under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. I didn't stay to hear her rights. I walked to the bookcase behind my desk and pulled a specific volume, The Art of War. A hidden door clicked open, revealing a service staircase that bypassed the main elevators and the lobby entirely. It led to a garage 3 blocks away where a nondescript car was waiting. I stepped into the dark passage and closed the door behind me. The Sterling Empire was burning, and I was the only one who knew the way out of the fire. The service staircase was cold, smelling of damp concrete, and the ozone of the building's electrical guts. Every step I took downward felt like a year falling off my shoulders. I could hear the echoes of the chaos above. Heavy boots, the muffled shouts of police, and the distant, hysterical wailing of a woman who had finally realized her crown was made of thorns. I emerged into the damp air of a back alley, 3 blocks away from the Sterling building. I didn't look back at the skyline. I didn't need to see the flashing lights to know my handiwork was complete. A black sedan sat idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the midnight fog. A man stepped out of the driver's side. Not a limo driver, but a man I had known since before the Sterlings were a household name. His name was Silas. He was a retired investigator who knew where all the city's shadows hid because he had lived in them. You look remarkably calm for a woman who just blew up the most powerful family in the city, Silas said, opening the rear door for me. I didn't blow it up, Silas. I just stopped holding the pieces together. I replied, sliding into the leather interior. Did the files reach the newsrooms? The editors are fighting over who gets the front page, Silas said, as he pulled into traffic. By 6 a.m., Theo Sterling won't be able to buy a cup of coffee without being spat on. And Mahdir, the grand matriarch of charity, is currently being processed at the precinct. They found the ledger you left on the library desk, the one with the Chicago wire transfers. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, surgical satisfaction. And the North Tower? Evacuation orders were just issued, Silas reported, his voice grim. The investors are already filing emergency liens on every asset the family has left. There's nothing left to salvage. Beatrice, you stripped the bone clean. Good, I whispered. I want them to feel the hunger. I want them to know what it's like to have the floor vanish beneath their feet, just like they tried to do to me. We drove in silence for a while, weaving through the late-night traffic of a city that was about to wake up to a scandal of the century. I looked out at the passing streetlights. For 30 years, I had built walls to protect people who were sharpening knives behind my back. I had been the architect of my own prison. Where to now? Silas asked. The airport? I have the documents ready under the new name. Not yet, I said. I want to see the morning sun hit the building one last time. From a distance. I want to watch the moment the world realizes the Sterlings aren't just broke, they're extinct. We pulled into a parking lot on the Jersey side of the river, the perfect vantage point. The Sterling building stood tall, a monument of glass and steel. But as the first light of dawn began to gray the sky, it didn't look like an empire anymore. It looked like a tombstone. My phone buzzed in my lap. It was a restricted number. I knew who it was. I swiped the screen. Beatrice? Is that you? It was Theo. He sounded broken, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and sobbing. They're taking everything. They're saying I'm responsible for the steal. You have to tell them. You have the original reports. You can save me. Save you? I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. Why would I save a man who tried to lobotomize me with a signature? You wanted me to be a ghost, Theo. Well, this is what it's like. I'm invisible. I'm gone. And you're left in the ruins of a house you didn't even know how to build. I'll find you, he screamed. I'll tell them you did this. I'll tell them you're the one who moved the millions. Tell them whatever you like, I said. But remember, Theo, a man in a cell with no money and a destroyed reputation is just a crazy person shouting at the wall. And the wall, well, the wall doesn't care. I ended the call and pulled the SIM card out, tossing it into the dark waters of the Hudson. The sun was finally breaking over the horizon, painting the Sterling building in shades of blood orange. The empire is gone, Silas. I said, let's go. I have a long life to live, and for the first time, I don't have to share it with snakes. The sun was fully committed to the sky now, a cold, blinding disk that stripped the glamour away from the city's skyline. From across the river, I watched the Sterling building. Even from this distance, I could see the chaos. News helicopters hovered like vultures over a carcass, their blades chopping the air in a rhythmic, frantic beat. Silas remained silent, his hands steady on the steering wheel. He knew better than to interrupt a woman watching her life's work burn. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It was a lightness, a terrifyingly pure sense of relief. The weight of the Sterling name had been a yoke around my neck for 3 decades, and tonight I had finally snapped the wood. The morning edition just hit the digital stands. Silas said, tapping a tablet mounted on the dashboard. The headline was massive, dripping with the kind of controversy that sells papers and destroys souls. Sterling empire crumbles. Fraud, filth, and the fall of a dynasty. Below, it was a photo of Theo being led out of the penthouse in handcuffs, his head bowed, his face shielded from the cameras. There was another photo of Ma Dear, her silver hair disheveled, looking every bit the criminal she was. They haven't mentioned you much, Silas noted. Just that your whereabouts are unknown and that you are feared missing amidst the scandal. The narrative is that your husband and his mother were trying to silence you to cover their tracks. Let them think I'm a victim for a little longer, I said. It keeps the hunters off my scent while I finish the relocation. Is the transport for the physical assets secure? The millions you moved? Silas allowed himself a small, rare smile. They aren't in a bank, Beatrice. Just like you ordered. They've been converted into untraceable hard assets, rare gemstones, bearer bonds, and high-value art already en route to the vault in Zurich. You didn't just move wealth, you made it invisible. I nodded. That was the trick. Everyone looks for a wire transfer. No one looks for a crate of archival documents being moved by a private security firm 2 weeks before the explosion. I had been planning my exit long before I heard them whispering in the library. Their betrayal didn't start my fire. It just gave me the reason to finally strike the match. Where is Amanda? I asked. Silas flipped through a series of messages on his phone. She's in the hospital. Apparently, Mr. Holloway didn't take the news of his missing investment very well. He didn't kill her. That would be too messy. but he made sure she'll never walk into a high society gala again without a very expensive surgeon and a lot of makeup. The police are waiting by her bed to question her about the smuggling ring as soon as she's conscious. I felt no pity. Amanda had been the one to suggest the facility for me. She had wanted to lock me in a room where the walls were padded so she could spend my money on her vanity. Now, she would be locked in a hospital bed, staring at walls that smelled of antiseptic and failure. And Theo? He's being held without bail, Silas said. The North Tower scandal is being treated as a criminal negligence case with depraved indifference. Since he signed the final safety waivers, he's the primary target. The DA wants to make an example out of him. He's looking at 25 to life. I looked back at the Sterling building one last time. I thought about the 30 years of dinners, the board meetings, the fake laughter, and the way Theo used to look at me before he let his mother's poison seep into his ears. He could have had everything. We could have retired to the coast, left the empire to a competent board, and grown old in the sun. But he was greedy, and greed is a blindfold that makes you walk off a cliff. Drive, Silas, I said. I've seen enough. We turned away from the river, heading toward the private airfield in Teterboro. As we drove, I pulled a small, black notebook from my purse. It contained a list of names, the people who had helped Theo and Ma Dear behind my back, the secretaries who leaked my schedule, the loyal guards who looked the other way, the cousin who helped Ma Dear set up the Chicago accounts. My revenge wasn't finished. I had dealt with the head of the snake, but I still had the nest to clear out. I wouldn't use the police for them. I wouldn't use the news. I would use the one thing I had left in abundance, the truth. Silas, once I'm in the air, I want you to start the severance process for the names on page 4, I said, handing him the notebook. What kind of severance? He asked. The kind that ensures they never work in this city again. I replied, I want them to wake up to find their bank accounts frozen for suspicious activity and their professional licenses revoked. I want them to feel the same fog. They tried to convince me I had. I leaned back and watched the suburbs blur past. The Penthouse empire was a ghost story now, and I was the only one who knew how it ended. The private jet sat on the tarmac like a sleek, silver predator, its engines humming a low song of escape. As I stepped onto the stairs, the cool morning air brushed against my face, the first breath of a life that didn't belong to the Sterling name. I stopped at the top of the stairs, looking back at the horizon where the city sat, oblivious that its foundation had been gutted by the very woman who built it. I settled into the buttery, leather seat of the cabin. Silas stood at the door, holding a final envelope. The last of the hard assets have cleared customs in Singapore and Zurich, he said, handing me the package. You are now, for all intents and purposes, a woman who does not exist. The world will spend the next decade picking through the bones of Theo and Ma Dear, but they won't find a single footprint leading to this plane. Good, I said, opening the envelope. Inside was a passport with a new name, Beatrice Vance, and the coordinates for a villa on the Amalfi Coast that I had purchased through a series of shell companies 3 years ago. I had been building my exit ramp long, before they even thought to build my cage. What's the final word from the precinct? Silas paused, a grim shadow crossing his face. Theo tried to hang himself in the holding cell with his silk tie. The guards caught him. He's now on a 24-hour watch in the psychiatric wing of the prison. The irony wasn't lost on the press. The man who tried to commit his wife for insanity is now the one in the padded room. I felt a cold, sharp spark of satisfaction. It isn't irony, Silas. It's architectural integrity. A man like Theo was always hollow. He just needed someone to stop filling him up with substance. Without me, he's just a suit with no soul. And Ma Dear? She's refusing to eat, Silas replied. She keeps telling the guards that she's a Sterling and that people like her Don't stay in places like this. They've moved her to the general population. I don't imagine the women in there will have much patience for a fallen queen who sold out her own community for gambling debts. I took a sip of chilled water. The Penthouse empire was officially a cemetery. Amanda was broken, Ma Dear was humbled, and Theo was a ward of the state. I had moved millions, not just in currency, but in power. I had stripped them of their dignity, their freedom, and their future, all while they thought they were drugging a confused old woman. I leaned back as the plane began to taxi. They thought 60 was an age of decline. They thought a woman who had spent 30 years in the background had forgotten how to fight. They forgot that the one who designs the fortress always knows where the trapdoors are. I didn't need a lawyer to win. I just needed to let them be exactly who they were until the weight of their own greed crushed them. As the wheels left the ground, I looked down at the sprawling grid of the city. To the world, I was a victim of a family tragedy. To the Sterlings, I was the monster they had inadvertently created. But to myself, I was finally the owner of my own time. The empire was gone. The vengeance was complete. And the vintage woman who orchestrated it all was just getting started. They tried to bury me, but they forgot I was the one who owned the shovel. They wanted my empire, so I gave it to them, right before I set it on fire. Theo is screaming at walls. Ma Dear is a number in a cell, and I'm drinking wine on a coast they'll never find. You can take a woman's name, you can try to take her mind, but you can never take the fire from a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. If you enjoyed seeing the Sterling dynasty dismantled, make sure to smash that like button. If you think Beatrice was too cold, or if you think she didn't go far enough, let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe to Vintage Vengeance for more stories of cold-blooded payback. You don't want to be the one who misses what happens when the next quiet woman finally finds her voice. See you in the next one.